In today's session, we are going to do a review on the halachos of sefiras haomer in Sif Aleph. Very practical. We're going to get a lot done, and we're going to have the first part of the review for Sif Aleph. The following are notes that I took to summarize what we learned in Sif Aleph. They're broken down by different topics. Are we obligated to count sefira? Is that a Torah obligation, or is it from the rabbis? Should sefira be counted before mariv or after mariv, and why? Should sefira be counted before alanu or after alanu, and why? Should women count sefira? And if they would count sefira, would it be with a bracha? Why yes, why not? Does one personally need to count sefira, or can he listen to the chazan? Do we say Shemei Kona by sefira? Why would we not potentially? Is it better to count sefira with the congregation or not? Do you need a minyan for sefira? Why don't women count 7 clean days with the bracha? Right? You have Shiva Nakiyim over there. Before they go to the mikvah. Why don't they say a bracha on that? Why don't we say Shechiyanu by sefira? It's something that's new. Uh, do we say Ba Omer La Omer? Does sefira need to be counted in Hebrew? This we didn't, probably not going to cover today, but do we need to stand while counting sefira? Do you need to count the days and the weeks? Let's say you only counted just the days, just the weeks. If the person thinks or writes the day of sefira, but didn't verbally say it, would that be halachically considered counting or not? So these are the topics that we will dissect. This is the introduction, and this is basically what we covered. Can't think of something that is missed on these around 10 topics or so that we did in the last weeks and that we didn't cover. We should definitely be doing the review already because we only have 10 days left of Sira, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit about the halachas of Shavuos, right? That would be nice to do also. That would be very apropos. So, are we obligated to count Sira from the Torah or from the rabbis? Okay. Ozvahadar Mishnah Berurah relates that the Torah explicitly states that the mitzvah of Seder begins, from the day the Korban Omer is brought until 50 days later. Okay? There is an argument among the Rishonim, those are the rabbis 1,000 years ago, if the mitzvah of Seder is dependent on bringing the Korban Omer or not. Therefore, some say that since we don't have the Korban Omer, the obligation of Seder is only rabbinic nowadays. Others say that the mitzvah of sefira isn't dependent on the Korban Omer. Rather, the Torah related a sign when we should begin counting sefira. According to that opinion, there is an obligation. There's still an obligation to count sefira nowadays from the Torah. So basically, we have a argument if nowadays there's an obligation from the Torah or not, based on what the story is Sefira dependent upon the Korban Omer, or is just the day when we started saying Sefira? The basis of this argument is based on the Gemara in Maseches Menachos on Samach Vav. The Gemara relates that Abaye says that the mitzvah is to count the days and weeks of Sefira. Rabban Debei Rav Ashi would count the days and the weeks. Haomer, however, would count the days, but not the weeks. Amimar said that this commemorates the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi explains that the counting nowadays isn't obligatory because we don't have a Korban Omer. Rather, we count nowadays to commemorate the Beis Hamikdash, Seichel Hamikdash. Therefore, counting the days alone is adequate. In other words, since nowadays we are not obligated from the Torah to count Sira, therefore merely counting the days is enough. However, when the Beis Hamikdash was around and they brought the Korban Omer, they certainly also counted the weeks. So, according to this understanding that we have over here of Amemar, is that nowadays you don't need to count the weeks because it's only to commemorate Beis Hamikdash. When the Beis Hamikdash was around with the Korban Omer, you certainly would. You would count the weeks in addition to the days. However, Rabban Debei Ravashi argue in Ravashi and would count the days and the weeks. That's a mistake. Argue on a Meimar, not Ravashi. May.
So maybe
A
okay,
Meimar.
I mean,
Like over
sorry,
there.
yeah, okay.
All right. They would argue on a Meimar and would count the days and the weeks. What do they hold? Do they hold that even nowadays the obligation to count sefiras from the Torah and therefore they also counted the weeks? Or do they hold like a Maimar who said that nowadays we are not obligated to count sefira from the Torah? Rather, when the rabbis enacted to count sefira, it was like how the mitzvah of sefira is performed, was performed when obligated from the Torah, aka to count the days and the weeks. So that question is kind of unanswered. Okay, now there's a very interesting third opinion in the Rishonim that the Be'er Halacha doesn't quote. Rabbeinu Yerucham holds that nowadays we are obligated to count the days during Sefira from the Torah, and we are rabbinically obligated to count the weeks nowadays. The reasoning behind this is there are two psukim which relate the obligation to count Sefira. And in the footnote, those are the psukim. We learn from the pasuk in Vayikra that mentions days that we are always obligated to count sefira from the Torah, even when we don't have a korban omer. This is the understanding of many Rishonim, including the Rabbeinu Yerucham. You have to count the days, regardless if you have the korban omer. However, the second pasuk that only mentions weeks teaches us that we are only obligated from the Torah to count the weeks when we have a korban omer. With this in mind, we can understand why we don't recite two brachos on sefira, aren't counting the days and weeks, two mitzvahs that require two different brachos. Rather, according to the Rabbeinu Yerucham, since counting the days is the main mitzvah from the Torah, we therefore only recite the bracha on the days. We only count the weeks in order to commemorate what happened when the Beis Hamikdash was around. The bracha we recite on the days covers the potential bracha we need to recite on the weeks. This is similar to why we don't recite a bracha on the Aravos on Hoshana Rabbah.
Which is
Minhag Avosenu biyadenu, it's a custom, and it's covered from the bracha that we recite in the lulav on the daled minim. Similar idea.
mm-hmm. Technically supposed to have that in mind in Hoshana Rabbah.
Nah.
Well, which
Right, aren't our Rabbis more? It's more of a halacha Moshe Sinai, which is more strict, I guess you would
Yeah, it's
say.
also, you could say over there it's a little custom. As opposed to here, it's not a custom, it's a little stronger than the custom. You could say in some ways. Uh, Similarly, some don't recite a bracha on Halal on Rosh Chodesh, since it is only a custom and we don't say brachas on customs, like we learned in the halachas of Halal. Osvad Mishnah Berurah learns that according to Rabbeinu Yerucham, when the Beis Hamikdash was around, they would recite two brachas on sefira.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a tremendous insight from this Rabbeinu Yerucham.
which
So this
bracha?
basically is the introduction as to sefiras derabanan or deraisa, three different opinions. The Be'er Halacha relates that nowadays, according to the Rambam, Chinuch, and many other Rishonim, sefira is a Torah obligation. However, according to Torah and Shulchan Aruch, sefira is a rabbinic obligation to commemorate the Korban Omer that was brought when the Beis Hamikdash was around. Accordingly, this provides a strong basis for our custom to be careful not to count sefira until three stars emerge, since many hold that sefira is, in fact, a Torah obligation nowadays. So basically, to summarize the summary, either sefira is from the Torah, it's from the rabbis, or the days are from the Torah and counting the weeks are from the rabbis nowadays, that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash and the Korban Omer. That's the introduction. Should sefira be counted before mariv or not. It should be pointed out that there's a lot to say on sefira. What exactly we're counting, why we're counting up as opposed to not down, 1 to 49. There's a tremendous amount. This is strictly the halachic aspect that we're learning. Should sefira be counted before mariv? Well, we just assume it should be counted after mariv because that's what we do. That's what we're used to. Why should it be before? Shouldn't sefira be before mariv since sefira is from the Torah? And according to many, we saw that sefira is from the Torah. It should be before mariv. So you'll say Shema is also from the Torah. No, but let's say you're davening, and it's before when 3 stars are here.
They're already here.
No, let's say it's before then. Okay, so you're not fulfilling the obligation of Shema.
Okay.
So now maybe you should count Sefira, right? Okay, so question is how to learn this question. Shouldn't it be before Mariv if it's from the Torah? Because Shema is also from the Torah. Okay. Even according to those who hold that Sefira is rabbinic, Sefira has a basis from the Torah. Conversely, Tefillah, Shemona Esrei, according to all opinions, is rabbinic and doesn't have a basis from the Torah. So this question assumes that Shema is out of the picture, or it's too early to say Shema.
And they're talking about our tefillah, not the Yisara, right?
Yeah. Look at the
How do you
footnote over here. Even though Shema, Tadir V'Shein Tadir, good. Look at footnote 8. Even though Shema is from the Torah, nevertheless, since we are referring to a case when people are davening Mar before nighttime, they aren't fulfilling the obligation of Shema. Okay, that could potentially be the question. The question is, why are you counting Sefira then also? Okay, that's another discussion in of itself. Even though Tefillah is more common, David, than Sefira, nevertheless, since Sefira has a basis from the Torah, it should proceed. Okay, so the question is, we are assuming that something that has a basis from the Torah would override and would come before something that is more common. That's why Sefira would come before Tefillah. Footnote 9. The Gemara in Brachos says Parak says that something that is more common precedes Tadir V'She'ina Tadir Kodem.
Again, we're talking about that's Sefira the Raisa, the Rabbana in this case.
That's why we said it doesn't matter because it has a basis from the Torah. This is the understanding of the Oz V'Hada Mishnah Berurah in their commentary to the Be'er Halacha. Opening Be'er Halacha.
Has a basis in the Torah.
Because it doesn't. It's a smachta. It's based on a pasuk, but doesn't have a basis from the Torah. A little bit different, perhaps. Is what to look into there.
Okay.
So what to look into there. Moruk explains that we count Sefira after Shemona Esrei because in the earlier generations the custom was to daven Mar before night. When they would finish davening, night began and it was time to count Sefira. They would then count according to the halacha, meaning halachically proper manner. Those were the Mishnah Berurah that the custom remained to say Sefira after mariv, even though we no longer daven mariv when it is still day, or before it's properly night. Answer 2, Chol Yaakov explains from the letter of the law, one needs to first say Shema and Shemona Esrei because they are more common. So the Chol Yaakov doesn't come on to that assumption that something that has a basis from the Torah would override something that's more common. More common will come first. Yeah. So it's an interesting discussion. Does Tadir or Daraisa proceed? Should Sefira be counted before alanu? Chok Yaakov Prima Gadol Mishnah Berurah say that Sefira should be counted before alanu because it is better to count Sefira earlier in order to get more completeness. Pasuk says to mimois tiyena. The earliest time when someone is halachically able to count, he should count then, because that's more of a completeness. What does that mean? Completeness means major discussion about Sefira. Is it 1 mitzvah? Is it 49? Is it 7? Is it, then you start adding weeks. How many is it? There's definitely an idea of having a completeness with everything. But there's also an idea of independently every single night. So instead of counting sefira after I don't know 11:30 mariv, it's better to go to an earlier mariv once it's the halachic proper time to count sefira, in order that you could get a completeness of that night, so to say.
More.
Yeah, it's more of a completeness. Okay, that's what Tamimus Tiana means. So practically, that manifests itself that it's better to count before alenu because it's more of a completeness. It's earlier on, so to say, albeit only a few minutes. The Oz V'Hadar Mishabur explains that the explanation of this pasuk is to get 7 complete weeks. Someone who counted late the first night, therefore, won't have 7 full weeks. This is a way to preferably perform the mitzvah. However, b'diavad post facto, one would still fulfill his obligation if he missed counting during the beginning of the night. Furthermore, just like cutting the korban haomer was kosher the entire night, so too sefira is kosher the entire night.
And one time we are not doing good to
What-
pay the first for
Yeah.
our line.
What? Why do we do it? He's saying that. He's saying it right now.
Okay, now
Let's
comes
put-
along the other opinion. Some argue. Let's not pretend that there aren't many shuls and places that count sefira after alin. So the question is why? So the Gra and many others in the Ma'aser of relates that the Vilna Gaon and many others said alenu before sefira. Why? Tadir v'sheina tadir kodem. Alenu is more common than sefira, and furthermore, alenu is part of davening and connected to Shmona Esrei, unlike sefira. Sefira is really an independent mitzvah that has nothing to do with mariv itself. And therefore, sefira would be considered a interruption between Shemona Esrei and alenu. So it would be a hefsek. That is the basic difference of opinions as to why sefira will come before alenu or alenu will come before sefira. Now let's go a little bit deeper on this because it's more than just this. Okay? It's more than just, okay, Mishnah Berurah says Tamimos is more important, you get the completeness, versus others say that Tadir would precede. Tadir in something that's part of davening, meaning what would be the rebuttal? How could you explain, okay, how could you now say I'm going to count Sefira before Alenu? What about the issue that number one, Alenu is more common, like the Chok Yaakov and the Be'er Halacha, which is why we daven first before Sefira completely, the mariv and Shema and Shemona Esrei, etc. What would be the rebuttal to that? And what would be the rebuttal that Sefira is an independent mitzvah that has nothing to do with mariv, and therefore it would constitute as a interruption, and therefore you should count Sefira after Alenu. Well, what would be the rebuttal to that? Why doesn't the Mishnah Berurah, why don't all these Gedolei Poskim, Pri Magad and the Chok Yaakov, why don't they all say like that? Why do they say that Sefira should come first? In order to properly understand this, we have to investigate and research as to why Alenu was enacted to be said at the end of daven. Okay? Was Alenu established to be the completion of each tefillah, aka if you have a Shemona Esrei, Alenu is going to come after? Or was Alenu established to be said before you physically leave the shul? Okay. The practical difference between the two would be obvious. We have to just point out something over here. On after Shachris, on Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh, we don't say Alenu. Why? If you hold that Alenu was established to be said after Shemona Esrei, so then you should say it. Also, certain times on Yom Kippur. All right? Okay, now let's say you're going to say Alenu was established to be said before you physically leave the shul. So then why are you saying Alenu after Mincha and Erev Shabbos when you don't leave the shul? Why are you saying it over there? And certain times on Yom Kippur, why would you be saying it if you're not leaving the shul? Right? So it's a little cryptic over here because either way you go, you're losing out and you're kind of contradicting the reason why you say Alenu. Something fishy's going on over here. Right, okay. There's an amazing Bach in Siman Kuflam and Gimel. The Bach says The purpose of saying alanu is to ingrain within our hearts the yichud of Hashem, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to strengthen this belief. In other words, before we go out and leave shul, most people, they interact with people who aren't Jewish. Alenu reminds us, forget about their idolatry. Go through Alenu and translate the thing. It says, forget about their idolatry, forget about thinking of sinning. Forget about all that. We therefore pray in Alenu before leaving the shul that we shouldn't be tempted to be involved with such trivial pursuits or thoughts of sinning. Thoughts of sins. According to this Bach, there's only an obligation to say Alenu before we physically leave the shul. This is why, in fact, the Chassam Sofer had the custom not to say Alenu after Mincha on the eve of Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. Because no one's leaving the shul until after mariv, you don't need to say alanu, according to this Bach. That's what the Chassam Sofer did. Similarly, on Yom Kippur, Chassam Sofer would not say alanu the entire day because he was in shul all day. However, others argue and say that no, alanu should be said after each Shmona Esrei because alanu is part of Shmona Esrei. It's part of Tefillah. This is the opinion of the Gra and the Shari Tshuva, quoting the Arizah. Therefore, before we tie back into sefira, what about us nowadays? So it's discussed nowadays. Really, we hold alenu is supposed to come after every single tefillah, right? Really, we're going to hold that way. It's going to come after every single Shemona Esrei, regardless. Why then don't we say it after Shachris on Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, and Shabbos, or maybe certain times in Yom Kippur? The answer is because it's B'chad HaMachta. It's considered like one group, one setting, so to say, because you're going totally back to back. And therefore, that's why you would not say Aleinu in those places. Why then do we say Aleinu after Mincha on the eve of Shabbos or Yom Tov if we're not, right?
If we're not packing it.
If why don't you say that it's Chad HaMachta, that it's one group, and therefore you shouldn't say it like Shachris and Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh? The answer would be because you're going from a day to a night. You're going from something which is completely different, two davenings which are totally different. Mincha is a totally weekday mincha, where mariv, Kabbalah Shabbos, it's Shabbos or Yom Tov zone.
So we're saying you can't say chad mach in this scenario.
Exactly. Perhaps that's the way that we could reconcile this, but this requires more research. When we learn the halachas of Aleinu, I'm sure we'll delve a little bit deeper into this topic. Therefore, tying it back in, the Gra had the custom to count sefira, which is an independent mitzvah that isn't part of davening, after Aleinu, in order not to interrupt the Seder Tefillah. What's the order of Tefillah? Shmona Esrei, then Aleinu. Okay. Furthermore, Aleinu is more common than sefira. So therefore, that's why Aleinu should come first. This would be a reason why the Shir Shal Yom should be said after Aleinu. We don't say Aleinu after Shachris and Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh because we haven't finished davening. Since we say Musaf immediately after, that's the B'chad HaMachta, that's the Gra. However, those who argue and hold to say Sefira before Aleinu, which is us, hold that Aleinu is not part of the order of Tefillah. Rather, Aleinu was enacted to be said before leaving shul like the Bach. Also, that's what we do. So if we're going to count Sefira, so now we have to answer up for this way. So if we're going to count Sefira before Aleinu, we're showing Aleinu was established like the Bach before we physically leave the shul. Oh, if it's established before we physically leave the shul, now it makes sense why we don't say it after Shachris and Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, and Yom Tov, because we're not physically leaving the shul. Also in Yom Kippur, we're not saying it because we're still in the shul.
So, but they were using.
Then what's the question? What's the question then?
By Shabbos, by Friday night mincha.
Oh, so then why do we do it on
Shabbos
night?
So we use that reason
because we use that same reason the other way, because there's a total disconnect between the two davenings. Right? You're not physically leaving the shul, true. But there's a disconnect between, in terms of the days, maybe there a reason to say it. Watch this though. I once bounced this off of my chavrusa, this whole idea, and he said, "So why do you need to say alanu on Shabbos or Yontif at all?" According to the Bach. According to the Bach, it's to remind you not to follow the idolatry before you go to
Not
work.
dealing with that.
You're not dealing with that in Shabbos Yontif. That's a knockout question. So the answer would be because you still need to worry about idolatrous ideas, even though you're not going out to work. Maybe
Unless
the
you
question's
work-
better than the answer.
Yeah, but unless you live in a ghetto like we do, I guess a little bit.
Most
You're
Jewish.
gonna see Goyim. You're gonna deal with
You,
Goyim.
you will, but you're not really dealing with them on Shabbos. You're not doing business with them. You're not dealing with them in close quarters. You don't need to worry about such a
Uh-huh.
thing. So the question is better than the answer.
We
That
don't-
also requires more research.
So I think we talked about Yom Kippur, right? I think after Musaf, could be maybe they didn't have a break. Maybe that's why I didn't say Olenu. But I don't think we say Olenu after Musaf and Yom Kippur.
Right, correct.
Then you say, Yonah. You say Yonah.
So you
Yonah, yeah. Yonah's at Mincha, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. The question becomes after Mincha and after Ne'ilah,
After the Elah, right?
right? Because you're going straight into the next one, right? So this whole discussion with alinu requires more research, but this sheds some light on the topic
Yes.
of, okay, this idea, this whole long paragraph of this Torah with alinu, this I saw in the Maluim on the back of the Maisarav, quoting the Harari Kedem and Chilik Beis Simin Kuftes, and this is uh the Harari Kedem is the one who started basically YU. He's Rabbi Soloveitchik. He's the main one. I looked it up.
Rabbi Yosef.
I think so.
Yosef,
Yes, yeah, I think so. So I don't. We usually don't learn so much of what he says, but they quoted in the Maisarav in the Maluim. It's a nice idea. It's
And he
Torah.
said what?
He's this whole idea that he tied in with the alanu.
Oh.
This whole idea with
Very nice.
that's where this comes from. So it's a nice idea. We didn't see it anywhere else as to why was alanu established. Was it connected to each tefillah, or is it just after you leave? Would it be an interruption or not? Does one need to personally count sefira, or can he listen to the chazan and be yotzei shemaya koine? Listening is like answering. Mishnah Berurah rules that someone who heard sefira from his friend and intended to fulfill his obligation would in fact fulfill his obligation. One could certainly listen to his friend recite the bracha and fulfill his obligation of the bracha sefira. Even so, the custom is for everyone to personally count sefira. The halacha concludes by ruling that preferably lechatchila, everyone should personally count. Over post facto b'di'ev, it's someone who heard the bracha of sefira and the sefira from the chazan and intended to fulfill his obligation. A lot of hands over there should count again without a bracha. That's the bottom line over there. Is it better? I'm with this, I guess. Is it better to count sefira with the congregation? Sefira does not need to be counted with a minyan. Even so, it is certainly preferable to do so. In fact, the more people one counts sefira with, the better. Kaf Chaim explains that even though the mitzvah of sefira is placed on every individual, even though the mitzvah of sefira is per is an individual obligation, is an individual obligation. Nevertheless, Shlosh says that it is fitting to count sefira with a congregation. Igros Moshe explains that it is fitting to perform mitzvahs with many people. Furthermore, someone who won't count sefira with the congregation is prone to forget to count. Shalos V'Tshuvas Minchas Yitzchak writes that from the Shloh it seems that there is a halachic concept of counting sefira with the congregation in addition to counting sefira with many people. Baroi V'Am Hadras Melech. So this is going to be the first session of the review of Sif Aleph. And we'll have one more session where we will complete the entire review of Sif Aleph and the summary. So, Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow we will continue.
We said we were going to touch on, should you rush your Shemona Esrei to say Sefira with the Kehillah?
Yeah, it's not going to get.
Not to it.
It's not going to get
I
covered.
know it. That's
Maybe we'll cover it over here. maybe we'll cover it. The
I,
basic answer, I'll answer that right now, Ragalachas, is going to be that there's going to be machlokes between the
Not usual.
Ber Halacha and the Chazan Ish if you are going to need to speed up, or you should just continue to daven, similar to Kiddush Levana. Should you finish your davening in order to get Kiddush Levana,
wait,
or should you speed up the davening in order to get Kedusha by Mincha? It's going to be a machlokes. You could do whatever you want at the end of the day.
you don't have to say.
Right.
You don't have to say
Yeah.
two things. You don't have to
Okay.
say
Right.
Yeah.
about Zion. You don't have to say about Zion before Kiddush Levana, right?
Balat Sion before Kiddush Levana should preferably be done with the congregation.
Right.
But
If
if you're
you,
going to miss
but
the congregation
yeah,
doing Kiddush Levana, then you can do it after. Yes.
and also too, one of the milas of davening the Sefard, or saying alanu, davening in a minyan where they say alanu first, is because you have more. You have potentially was it more
More
time, or
time if you have a longer Shemona Esrei,
and
correct.
also more headspace too. You don't have to worry about rushing.
Yeah, you could say that. I don't think that's a halachic consideration.
Yeah,
Um, Especially if you daven up, if you have a long Shemona Esrei, you daven at a place that daven slower, it's usually not an issue. But
yeah,
yeah, it's a good point though. It's a good point. Yeah,
yeah. Anyways,
yeah. All right, very good. All right, have a good day.
shkach.
All right, bro.